As moms, we often wonder, am I doing enough for my kids? I'm here to tell you, you are super mama. That's because we have an undeniable superpower, our intuition, and it never steers us wrong. I call it our mom sense. Hi, I'm Kanika Chadda Gupta, and I'm the host of That's Total Mom Sense. I'm a journalist, entrepreneur, wife, and mom of 3, twins plus 1. Now, if I had $1 every time I heard, gee, you have your hands full. On my podcast, I interview influential moms from various industries and cover topics that all first-time parents grapple with, from getting your baby to sleep to screen time allowance, your new normal in your marriage, and how to dedicate time to yourself. Learn and laugh along with That's Total Mom Sense. More than the F word, it's the C word that scares so many of us, especially women who have a history of cancer in their family. As mothers, we try to be hyper aware of the carcinogens all around us in the environment and our nutrition, and we try to steer clear of them to protect our kids. But when you're predisposed, it's a situation that often feels helpless because there's nothing you could have done to prevent it. Cancer affects the world's population in such an invasive way. We all know at least one person who is currently fighting cancer, is a survivor, or has passed away. Today's episode is about the measures we can take to prevent ourselves from becoming a statistic, how to screen for breast cancer, and how to deal with it if you happen to be diagnosed or have a friend or family member who is. Today on the show, I have with me Parul Somani. Parul is a healthcare executive and cancer survivor turned inspirational speaker, championing health, resilience, and a positive mindset. As the founder and CEO of Silver Linings, Parul combines her experiences as a young working mother diagnosed with breast cancer in her early 30s, a caregiver who transformed her parents' lives with her patient advocacy, and a businesswoman with 15 plus years of experience in management consulting and executive roles in consumer, technology, and healthcare companies. Parul's mission is to help improve the state of healthcare by sharing her experiences and inspiring others to live a healthy, thankful, and fulfilling life. She's shared her personal story through her cancer blog that's been read in 80 countries, films on survivorship and mindset, TV and radio segments, podcast interviews like this one, and public speaking engagements. Prior to becoming a professional speaker, Parul was head of global B2B and B2B2C marketing at Color Genomics, where she built and led the team responsible for the entire sales and consumer success marketing funnel for Color's enterprise and clinical channels. Before that, as VP of Growth for Weddington Way, Parul led the vertical integration and retail growth strategies that led to the company's acquisition by Gap Inc. As a management consultant at Bain & Company, Parul led teams advising Fortune 500 companies and private equity firms and helped launch Bain's first consulting office in India. Parul currently serves on the advisory board for Stanford's Health Communication Initiative and early stage startups. Parul holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science and a minor in Economics from MIT and an MBA from Harvard Business School. So Parul and I are connected through our mutual friend, Payal Kadakia Puji. And as many of you know, Payal is the founder of ClassPass, which, this year hit a milestone. It's the first female-led startup to hit unicorn status in 2020. And she's also, as we, know her best, the creative director of Saw Dance Company. And Parul and I are both members and dancers. And I love that Parul and I met at Payal's wedding, and we just kind of dove into a rehearsal and bonded over dance. Parul, I am so excited to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So let's start from the beginning. Tell us about your childhood and what it was like growing up in an Indian family.
Sure. My childhood was great, and in some ways, like many classic immigrant families, I was born in India, in Rajasthan, and moved to the U.S. when I was very young, just under 3 years old. And we moved to Portland, Oregon. And I spent my first 14 years there, seeing my parents work very hard. My dad had his main day job, but both my mom and dad had multiple entrepreneurial side hustles throughout the years. I saw their work ethic, and that was definitely something instilled in myself and my sister through that process as well. But I also remember many carefree days just, playing in the apartment complex and playing kickball and riding my bike. And in some ways, much more carefree than, our children are allowed to be in this day and age. But then I moved to the south of Seattle area where I went to high school. Then I moved to the East Coast for college.
Very cool. And now, I want to kind of do a deep dive into today's show topic. It's surprising that we have not found a cure to all the various cancers that exist today. But tell us how it began for you.
Sure. So cancer itself has actually had a presence in my life since childhood. I was very young when my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer in her early 30s. My own personal cancer journey began back in 2012. I was 29 years old, and was just at a OBGYN appointment talking about my family history and mentioned my mom's early onset breast cancer, and was fortunate to have an OBGYN who recommended that I get genetic testing done to find out if I'm at elevated risk. And in some ways, I had always just assumed that I was at an elevated risk given my mom's history.
Sure.
But felt that getting the genetic testing done would be powerful, because if it did confirm that I carry a genetic risk as well, then I would qualify for mammograms and MRIs at an earlier age than I otherwise would have, and would, increase my chances of being able to either prevent something or catch something at a more treatable stage than I otherwise might have. And so it was almost a nonchalant decision at the time to agree to the genetic testing. It was a simple cheek swab. I didn't really go through any counseling or understand what the implications might be. When you fast forward a few weeks later, I was in a car on the way to the airport for a friend's wedding when I got the unexpected call from the doctor saying that, I'm sorry to say, you carry a mutation in the BRCA1 gene. Okay. And my lifetime risk of developing breast cancer was over 80% compared to the average woman's lifetime risk of about 10 to 12%.
Oh, my goodness.
So, understanding those numbers were really eye-opening in terms of not just going through the screening, the mammograms and MRIs, but also just awakening in me my own awareness of changes in my body and the importance of recognizing when things might be different. Mm-hmm. So 2 years after that, I was 31 years old, and I was actually 38 weeks pregnant with my second daughter. And I was actually just at an ultrasound appointment and happened to be reclining in the exam chair. And I felt an itch on in my chest. And when I went to scratch it, I actually felt a lump. And I had actually Googled a couple years prior what a breast cancer lump feels like. And it had been described as a hard pea-sized mass. Immediately went to my OBGYN's office after the ultrasound was completed at the hospital and requested a physical exam. And she, amongst other doctors in this process, had actually thought that there was nothing to worry about because I was only 31 years old, I was quite young, and I was pregnant. And so lumpiness is common, and the likelihood of it being a clogged milk duct is also very high. But it was because of the genetic testing that I had done. I advocated for, further testing, and that's why they agreed that I should get an ultrasound and biopsy done. Well, 2 days later, my water broke 2 weeks early. And so I never actually made it to the appointment for the ultrasound and biopsy that had been made. And I went through a C-section, and she had complications after birth and was in the NICU. And so there were just a number of reasons that would have made it very easy to dismiss the lump and just prioritize the present with my daughter at the time. And yet, because of the genetic test results, we had it top of mind that this is important to get checked out. And so we actually had my husband wheel me from the NICU to the neighboring breast clinic to have an ultrasound and biopsy done. And it was on my newborn's 1 week birthday that we got the call saying the lump is malignant after all. And I had stage 2 triple negative.
How did you react react to that moment? I mean,
So while we were still at the hospital, while my daughter was still in the NICU and I had gone in for this biopsy, we had a number of reasons to think that there was nothing to worry about, because even the breast surgeon doing the biopsy said that the lump felt soft and is likely a clogged milk duct. And we were so focused on the complications that my daughter was going through that we really just did believe that there was nothing to worry about. Fortunately, she was cleared of anything major being wrong, and we were able to be discharged 5 days after her birth. And so we were actually back home and had been back home for 2 days before I got the call from the doctor. When she first told me that the lump is malignant after all, and that I do in fact have breast cancer, I actually initially had just gone into warrior mode. It was almost a matter-of-fact conversation of, okay, so what are we dealing with? What do I need to do? What is the plan? And she talked about chemotherapy and surgery and the possibility of radiation down the road. But it was only when she said, and obviously this means that you will need to stop breastfeeding. Strangely, that was actually the moment when I started tearing up, because nursing had been very difficult for me with my first daughter. And yet I had ultimately been able to do it. And I nursed her for 13 months. And it was very important to me to do that for Mira as well. And so even after the C-section in the NICU, I was really diligent about making my way to the NICU and nursing her, as needed. That was really when I started tearing up. And my mom is also standing there knowing I'm speaking to the surgeon. And I mouthed to her that it's cancer. And after I finished the call with the doctor is when I just dropped my head into my hands and started bawling.
Yeah. Kind of walk us through what the process after the screenings entails.
It was actually 1 month between me getting my diagnosis and actually starting treatment, which felt like the longest month of my life, but ended up being very important to go through that process of getting multiple opinions and really understanding what it is that we're facing and what the best next steps would be. I think there's a instinctive behavior to want to just jump into surgery and get this thing out. But I was advised that in these type of situations, months and years matter, but days and weeks do not. And so take the time to assess the situation. And so we really jumped right into action, which involved, getting more scans done. So additional MRIs, additional biopsies, assessing whether it had spread into the lymph nodes or not. And, you can just imagine I'm basically recovering from a C-section, so only partially being able to comfortably walk, wearing frozen cabbage leaves in my bra to try to wean off while going into an MRI appointment where I can barely even climb onto the MRI table because my abdominal muscles don't yet work well after the C-section. And so there's just a lot of moving pieces around that time. And one of the things that we found was very important was trying to find a care team that was most specialized in what it is that we were dealing with. And so what that means is not just a breast cancer oncologist or a breast cancer surgeon, but who has specific experience in my type of breast cancer, which is triple negative breast cancer and highly aggressive, and who has experience working with people with BRCA1 mutations, because the optimal treatment plan for them and the surgical recommendations for them differ from that of someone with average risk who just happened to develop breast cancer. And, we had gotten opinions from kind of more private hospitals that tend to recommend the more standard treatment of care, and also got opinions from the more academic research institutions like UCSF and Stanford that are more cutting edge in terms of research and aware of more progressive treatment options. And we eventually landed on pursuing my care at Stanford, and went with doing chemotherapy first and surgery afterwards, because that would allow us to actually monitor how the tumor was responding to the chemotherapy, which one allows us to shift chemotherapy, drugs and approach if we see that the tumor is not responding fast enough or actually not responding at all. Whereas if it is responding, then we actually have a more informed sense of prognosis because we have a measurable way of knowing that the chemotherapy was actually effective. Whereas lots of people do surgery first just to get the tumor out and then do chemotherapy, but then are essentially sitting fingers crossed for the rest of their life, just hoping they don't get a recurrence because they don't actually have any indicator of whether the chemotherapy was effective for them or not.
Oh, wow.
So in my case, I was fortunate to have a complete response, which means that the tumor disappeared entirely from my first line of chemotherapy. I had 10 rounds. And so the thought there is then that my prognosis is very strong because if a dense tumor was not able to withstand the toxicity of the chemotherapy, then the chance of a free-floating cancer cell is likely to not have survived as well.
Right. Okay. And what was chemo like? I mean, was it absolutely debilitating? Like, what were the sensations that you felt because of it?
So I think chemotherapy drugs and the ability to manage the side effects of them have evolved a lot in recent years and over the decades, from when my mom went through it. The decision of even figuring out which chemotherapy drugs to undergo actually was more of an art than a science than I had expected. And there was an option of chemotherapy drugs that would have been highly toxic, that they're actually considered the standard of care, but they're so toxic that they also carry a lot of long-term side effects to them. Mm-hmm. And then on the opposite end, there was a recommendation from Stanford to actually consider an even more progressive set of drugs that thought to be effective, but so not toxic that my hair wouldn't have even fallen out. So even determining which drugs to take, I sort of implemented my own life decision-making framework, which I call the path of least regret. If I think years from now, looking back, which option will I have the least regret with, that gives me peace of mind that I made the best choice with the information that I had at that time. And that involved actually coming up with a chemotherapy treatment that was a combination of the standard, one drug, which was the more standard care. So it is toxic enough that my hair would in fact fall out. But combining that with one of the more recent drugs that has been known to be very effective in my particular type of cancer. So those chemotherapy drugs have minimal longer term side effects to them, but they are toxic enough that, my hair did fall out. And I did go through the process of what initially started as, grieving my hair loss, but then I turned into more of a moment of empowerment by choosing to shave my head off before all of it fell out. So it felt like a decision I was making for myself rather than just one more thing that was happening to me.
That's amazing.
And as far as the side effects go, there is, of course, some nausea, but that's actually very well managed with other medications that doctors provide to patients now. So I actually did not throw up even once during my treatment. The biggest side effect from a lifestyle perspective was really just the fatigue. There were days where I felt like I had been hit by a truck and just could not get my body out of bed. Whereas there were other days where I felt perfectly fine and, was going on walks or doing things around the house. And, I still had 2 children at home at the time that I wanted to spend as much time with as I could. And so, I definitely tried to stay active throughout my treatment, but, having the support of my parents staying with us and helping care for me and my husband and the girls at the time. And of course, my husband being my rock through all of it, made it much more manageable than I had expected it to be.
Firstly, how common is it to be diagnosed with breast cancer or cancer in general for pregnant mothers?
So it's very rare. It's very unusual. I mean, the lifetime risk of breast cancer for the average woman is about 12%. 1 in 8 women are expected to be diagnosed with breast cancer in their lifetime. But that definition means up until the age of 80. And so when you look at the chart of how that risk actually increases by age, it's still very minimal risk at the ages of 20 to 40 plus when women might be in more childbearing years. That risk generally increases much more in their 50s and 60s and onwards. Mm-hmm. And so, even for me having a mutation in my BRCA1 gene and knowing that my lifetime risk was over 80%, my risk of actually developing it in my early 30s like I did was still low single digits. digit.
Right. Okay. And so out of the 1 in 8 women, how many of them have a history of breast cancer in their family, and how many, are diagnosed without any predisposition?
The majority of breast cancers, and by that I think it's around over 80% or so of breast cancers, are considered sporadic, which means that they are not due to a genetic mutation. They can occur unexpectedly, due to environmental factors, lifestyle factors, etc. So it is a smaller percentage of overall breast cancers that are due to a genetic mutation. That said, for those that have a genetic mutation, having that information is incredibly powerful for each of those individuals, just like it was for me to be able to catch my cancer early and treat it effectively. Also then benefited my own mother down the road. For those that have a genetic mutation, the risk is incredibly high. For those that do not have a genetic mutation, their risk still exists. It is not a non-zero risk, and there are still very important lifestyle choices to make sure to minimize that risk as much as possible, whether it's in the foods that they eat, the products that they use, and the self-exams that they conduct, and the screening measures that they undergo at the right age.
Right. And so your mom has the same genetic mutation of the BRCA1 gene, right?
Yes, she does. What that means is not just that there's a heightened risk for breast cancer, which she, of course, already had 30 years ago, and there's still a risk another one could come as well. There's also, for both her and me, a heightened risk of ovarian cancer. And so instead of the average population having a 1% lifetime risk of ovarian cancer, we both have an over 50% chance of developing ovarian cancer. Over 85% of ovarian cancers are detected in an advanced stage, 3 or 4, where they're much less treatable because they're so hard to detect. The screening methods that are currently available in terms of blood tests or ultrasounds are generally not being conducted for women. And even if they are, they're not necessarily fully effective in detecting an ovarian cancer early. She had her tubes and ovaries removed, and we thought the surgery had went well, and we had taken the necessary precaution. About a week later, we got the results of the biopsy that the doctors conduct on the organs that they removed, and learned that there had actually already been cancer growing in her tubes.
Oh my goodness.
And we had just miraculously caught it at stage 1 because we happened to have gone through this surgery. But that had we even waited, 3 months until the end of the summer or so to conduct that surgery, it would have already been spread all over her body by then.
Oh my goodness. Do you feel like your drive to be an advocate is what led you to color?
Yeah, so after having gone through my journey with cancer, I definitely felt a drive to professionally shift focus into something much more mission driven that I'm passionate about. I actually didn't know what that passion would be and how exactly I would be channeling that. But when I came across an article talking about color genomics, and their mission at the time was to democratize access to genetic testing for hereditary cancers, that's when I felt like that was a mission that I could get behind and support and want to advocate, because genetic testing and the results of it had played such an influential role in my own diagnosis and treatment. And yet in some ways, I was just lucky to have had an OBGYN who offered it to me. Many people do not get access to genetic testing because currently, in order for them to be covered by insurance, insurance companies generally have or require a pretty lengthy family history for you to qualify, a lengthy family history of cancer, of known family cancer, to qualify for genetic testing. And back when I was gone through testing in 2012, I was actually initially denied by my insurance company, even though my own mom had had early onset breast cancer.
Oh my goodness.
I think the guidelines have since changed, and so that would not be the case today. But it is definitely a point of friction because people, either don't necessarily have the family history of cancer or they just don't know what it is. But studies also indicate that over 50% of people who have a mutation in the BRCA1 or 2 gene don't have a family history of cancer.
Right.
And so what Color was looking to do is make this type of testing more readily available and at a price point that is more accessible, even if it's not going through insurance. And the reality is that the cost of genetic sequencing itself has plummeted in the past decade. And so the cost of doing it is actually much more affordable. But the list prices of the traditional labs and insurance company list prices have not necessarily declined. So a test that was having a $4,000 insurance list price was costing about $250 through Color.
Wow. And so they send you like swab kits and you do it on your own?
Yeah, so they are actually a physician-ordered medical grade genetic test. So they are medically actionable in their results, but they have a more consumer-centric experience. So you could go to color.com and purchase a test, which would then be a box that is shipped to you. You spit in a tube and you send it back, and then you can track your sample online, and you'll be notified by a genetic counselor when your results are ready, and have free access to those genetic counselors to discuss your questions and whatnot. Color in more recent times is more focused on population testing and working with health systems to bring genetic testing into more routine clinical care. But individuals are still able to purchase the test from color.com if they so choose.
Right, right. So what led you to launching Silver Linings?
So over the past several years after my diagnosis, I had been sharing my story pretty broadly as something that I was just doing on the side. So during treatment, real time, I blogged my entire cancer journey in a blog that has now been read in 80 countries. Also shared my experiences at healthcare conferences in regards to the role of genetic testing and the importance of that information, as well as on behalf of Stanford healthcare in films on survivorship and mindset, and the grand opening of the new Stanford Hospital, etc. And what I realized is that I was incredibly passionate about inspiring others and helping them learn from my own experiences, and not just the clinical experience of being a cancer warrior or a patient, but also the role that positivity and resilience and mindset played in my journey would be relevant to people regardless of the hardship that they're going through, because hardships themselves are inevitable, yet the benefits of those type of personal skills are helpful, no matter whether it's a health challenge or otherwise. I felt inspired to focus full-time on turning what I had been doing on the side into more of my full-time focus, which is being an inspirational speaker and focusing on building this platform that allows me to help others learn from my experiences and focus on living their own, healthy and fulfilling and thankful life.
Wow, that's incredible. Tell us about your motherhood journey.
So my motherhood journey has definitely evolved over the years. I was 29 and working as a management consultant at Bain and Company when I had my first daughter. So had been working full time, theoretically went into part-time after her delivery, but part-time management consultant is a full-time job anywhere else in terms of number of hours. And then, when I was pregnant with my second daughter, I was actually working at a startup. Not necessarily the optimal time to join a startup, but I had always made sure to work for organizations and teams that were very supportive of working parents and flexibility. While my husband and I were both working office jobs full time, we had a full-time nanny at home that was incredibly important in terms of keeping us sane and our family working together. Now my daughters are 5 years old and 8 years old, and I have realized that this is just a very special time of life when they are truly becoming their own individuals, developing their own personalities, but also still want to hang out with me. And, the problems or the challenges that are involved with them are no longer as physically demanding as they were when they were, babies, but now are more emotionally demanding in terms of how they were treated at school and what it is that they want to talk about. So for me, it became really important that I now be able to have a job that I really own my lifestyle with, that gives me the flexibility to be as present with them as possible. And so I made a choice, which was not something I had ever expected to do, was to not be an employee for a company and be a working mother in a way that I define my own terms, running my own business with silver linings and having the flexibility to be able to pick them up from school, spend the afternoons with them, at this age where I think it's so important, and yet also pursue my own passion, in other times of the day. And, they are just little bundles of joy that they also love dancing. It's really interesting because children can be so similar to you and yet so different from you at the same time. So I have two daughters that both love dancing. One who, just like me, loves the stage, has a big bright smile on her face, when she's performing. And yet I have another daughter who loves dancing and yet is terrified of the stage and of an audience and people looking at her. And so I think it's an amazing journey where you learn how to, parent someone who's different from you, and yet you just do your best to instill in them the values you want them to learn. It's probably the hardest role I've ever had in my life and probably ever will. But obviously the most rewarding as well.
Yes, absolutely. There's a ritual that you do with your daughters, and I think it's such a beautiful thing. You wrote an article about it, how you kind of give them these terms of affirmation to start their day with. So can you tell us about that?
One of the things that I do is, in some ways brainwashing, but it's really around repetition of affirmations. And, it started when they were really young with the question of, what do you do if you fall down? And they know to respond with, I get back up. But right. the ritual of affirmations that we do is a list of Post-it notes that I have on their bathroom mirror that read, I am loved. I love myself. I am resilient. I choose to be happy, and I will work hard at what I love to do. And my daughters read those Post-it notes to themselves every day before going to bed. And I will occasionally, pop quiz them on what do the Post-it notes say. And, they're able to, recite it from memory at a moment's notice. And what's amazing to see now is that my elder daughter, Dia, who's now 8, has actually started adding her own Post-it notes to the mirror. And most recently has added, I am kind and I am intelligent.
Oh, that is so sweet. Do you find yourself worrying that they're going to have, something like this to grapple with when they're older?
Yeah, it's definitely on top of mind for both my husband and myself that they have a 50% chance of carrying this gene mutation as well. The genetic testing is something that is not available to minors. And I personally am happy with that because I want them to go through testing, but at an age where they are emotionally equipped to understand what it means and actually able to start taking action on it. I actually would not want them to get tested at this young age because right now they're so young that they might not even know that they went through testing, and only my husband and I would know. Mm-hmm. But when they're teenagers and more familiar with my public story and the risk the family might be at, and if they were to ask me, well, am I at risk? Did I get the testing done? I don't want to lie to them, and yet I don't think at age 16 or whatnot, they might have the emotional maturity to know the results of those tests either. And so when they're in their 20s, I'm definitely going to be a proponent of them getting the testing done and starting screenings at an earlier age. But in the meantime, I prefer to recognize that they very possibly are at heightened risk and therefore, take the necessary precautions in terms of diet and lifestyle, now just assuming that risk is there. And so, I am much more anti-sugar for my children than the common mom might be.
Sure.
And, of course, my kids love candy and treats just like any child does. And yet at the same time, they're very familiar with it being unhealthy. And, when they're somewhat brainwashed now to know that if they get candy, like in their Valentine's box at school or whatnot, that, they'll bring it home and then just be excited to put the candy in the Halloween basket, which then will last in the basket until Halloween, at which point they will get to choose one candy.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course, I want them to enjoy their childhood. And so they, eat birthday cakes and cupcakes and things like that at parties. But, I am definitely some more stringent about that than others. Other dietary changes for them too.
So for the listeners out there, I want to know how we can get involved, back the cause, donate. Is Breast Cancer Society the most prominent foundation that we should be backing? Are there smaller organizations that you feel are just as good to support?
Yeah, there are numerous organizations through which someone could support breast cancer. I think it first involves identifying what aspect of cancer or breast cancer you're wanting to support. And what I mean by that is it research oriented? Is it supporting research for breast cancer overall, or is it supporting research for drug development, or supporting research for specific subcancer types? Or is it actually supporting patients that are undergoing treatment right now, and the resources that are then made available to them? And there are organizations at both the national and local level. And I think once you identify what type of support it is that you want to provide, checking charitynavigator.org to see what the different organizations are that are available and which ones are reputed to be efficient with their spend, meaning optimizing for most of that donation to actually go towards the purpose and not to overhead expenses, is a sort of tactical step someone could take to identify how to donate or support. My husband and I are partial to supporting the Stanford Women's Cancer Center through the Under One Umbrella organization because of our personal experiences with them, but there are obviously a number of other organizations to choose from as well.
So when was a time when you trusted your mom's sense?
I think there was a time related to my first daughter, Tadia, when she was a young baby. That was probably the first major health challenge that I had experienced for my family in adulthood, and that was that when she was born, her skin and face looked fine when she was born, but early on, I started noticing redness developing on her cheek. And it was this feeling that, we need to get this checked out and better understand what this is. And the pediatrician had mentioned that it could be a hemangioma, which is a birthmark that babies are not born with, but that in 10% of cases, which I actually thought was high because I was so unfamiliar with it at the time, but have since noticed many babies to have it, is like a benign blood tumor that develops over time in the newborn's early months, that it actually grows very rapidly, can grow to be very large. When it's on the face, it can actually grow to disrupt, the face in terms of eyesight or nose or whatnot, depending on how big it is. And while it does go away on its own, it can take 5 to 10 years for it to disappear on its own, and that there could be, permanent damage to the skin, depending on how large it gets. And it's not just large as in surface area; it's actually 3D, and can bulge out. And at that time, it was still just a small, flat, red little circle that was pinkish circle developing on her skin. But it was this feeling that I want to explore options to to see what we can do about this, because even if it goes away on its own, by the time she's 5 to 10 and it starts going away, there could already be impact to her self-esteem by that point. If we had only taken the pediatrician's advice on it, then that would have been insufficient, because we were given the advice that all that can be done to treat this at the time is either steroid injections or laser treatments, neither of which we were comfortable doing for our 2-month-old. And it was through our own advocacy and pushing for, again, specialist opinion, we found our way to a dermatologist at UCSF who had expertise in the area and was able to share with us a more progressive treatment at that time, which was using propranolol, which is actually a blood pressure medication that has been used in children and adults for decades. Is just a liquid medication that had in recent years been found to have a sort of side effect benefit of quickly reducing the size of these hemangiomas before they grow to be too big. And so, when my daughter was 4 months old, we were able to start her on this medication, which again was like just a liquid medication through a dropper. It did require me until she was 14 months old, I did need to nurse her throughout the night every 3 hours. So even when I went back to work as a full-time consultant, I was still waking up every 3 hours to feed her in the middle of the night because of the possible side risk of low blood sugar. But that medication ended up being extremely effective in reducing the size of the hemangioma and minimizing the any sort of permanent impact that would be left on her skin. And she's now 8 years old and it's barely visible at all. But it was actually the experience of doing the research on that new medication and coming across a YouTube video of a family who had actually used that medication on their own child and documented how the hemangioma had responded and how happy they were with the results. It was that experience that inspired me to want to also document my journey with cancer then years later and share that with the world, because I had experienced firsthand the benefit of experience sharing and how much comfort it had brought our family at a time of distress, going through my daughter's case, that I wanted to then be able to do the same in return for others.
That's wonderful. Wow.
Let's not forget our quote of the day.
Is there a quote that you live by?
So in recent years, I would say that the quote that I think about a lot is from Martin Luther King Jr. When he said, "Only in the darkness can you see the stars."
Wow.
Because what that reflects for me is the reality that dark and light go hand in hand, and the moments of darkness in our lifetime are inevitable. And it's more about our perspective of how we're going to face those hard times and the appreciation that we're going to have for the good times, and maintaining that perspective that there are silver linings to our hardships. And, sometimes we just have to be willing to see and recognize them.
Yes. And I mean, it manifests in your work, your day-to-day, your mission, and who you are. It's those beautiful silver linings that are shining.
It's now time for Mom Haul, when we share products we love.
So, is there a product that you're just loving right now and you want to share with everybody?
So if I think about mom products, even though this is tangential to what most of this talk has been about, but if I think of a product that has made a very big difference in my husband's and my parenting of our children and our own happiness, I would actually say it's our color changing clock.
Oh, cool.
We got when my elder daughter was very young. She was 2 years old. So if you're unfamiliar, it's available on Amazon, but it's basically a clock that you can set the alarm to. Instead of making a sound, it actually changes the color of light that's emitted from the clock. And the reason this was important is because when our daughter would wake up at, say, 4 a.m, she doesn't know if it's dark out because it's 4 a.m, or if it's dark out because it's 6:30 a.m. and still reasonable time to actually get up. And so by setting the color changing clock for her, she would just be able to look at the clock. If the green light was now shining, then she would know that it's an appropriate time to call out for us. And, we would come get her from the crib. And yet if the light was not shining, then that means that it's still nighttime, sleepy time, and she should just close her eyes and put herself back to sleep.
That is the coolest thing ever. Oh my goodness. And I feel like every child would just love that, and because it makes getting up in the morning fun when you see your favorite color show up.
Absolutely. When we first introduced it to her, she would be like jumping with joy when she was like, the green light's on, the green light's on. And we had introduced that to her when she was 2 years old. She was still in her crib at the time. And that was really helpful because she basically became conditioned to know that you don't get out of bed unless the green light's on. And so when we then transitioned her into a big girl bed, we never actually had to worry about her, waking up in the middle of the night and coming to our room, because she just knew, well, the green light's not on, so I'm not supposed to leave my bed, even though technically she now has the physical freedom to do so.
Yes.
My kids are now 5 and 8, and we still use the color changing clock, for school wake up and weekend wake up, because we, change what the acceptable wake up time is to a later time on the weekends. So for any of the newer moms or out there who, haven't heard of that, that could be something that's helpful for years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll link it in the show notes. And it's available on Amazon?
Yeah.
Okay. Very cool. So my product is from a brand that I love and support and endorse. It's Gaiam, and they're, the known kind of yoga brand. And I actually love this this product, the balance disc. So I put it on my chair and I'm sitting on it right now. And it kind of engages your core, much like a Bosu, while you're sitting. And it's great because I feel like, I don't have as much time as I'd like, I don't make time to hit the gym as much as I'd like to. But I know that while I'm at my desk or recording a podcast, I'm engaging my core and, having good posture. And so, I love this balance disc, and it's only $22. You can get that on Gaiam's website, and I do have a code, and it is MomSense20, all caps, and you get 20% off your order. Where can my listeners find you?
Sure. So my website is parulsomani.com. So PARULSOMANI.com. They could also type in designingsilverlinings.com, and it redirects to the website as well. And that site holds more information about my mission, my story, and the work that I now do in terms of speaking engagements and whatnot. And I'm also, of course, on Instagram and Twitter under the @PD Somani handles, and on Facebook under @Designing Silver Linings.
Awesome. Parul, it has been a joy having you on the show. Thank you so much for sharing your story, for being an advocate, for being a voice, for helping those in need that may not even know they need it until they hear you. Thank you so much for helping us find those silver linings in our day-to-day.
Thank you for having me.
That's total mom sense.